Hello and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Connecticut Affordable Housing Conference. I am Danielle Hubley, Advocacy and Education Manager with the partnership. I'm also joined by partnership staff Sean Gio, our Senior Policy Advisor. As I mentioned before, are at Connecticut's Affordable Housing Conference. The conference features local, state, and national experts leading conversations exploring challenges, best practices, and coalescing us all around critical next steps to address key affordable housing issues in our state. This year, the conference is focused on building stability, and each session spotlights unique approaches to strengthening housing stability for households and communities across Connecticut. Feel free to join the conversation at our hashtag CAHC 2022 on Twitter. You can also follow us at PSC Housing if you haven't already. We're live tweeting most of the conference sessions, and all will be available via recording in the weeks following the conference. So keep an eye out. If you missed any, there will be more opportunities to catch those sessions. The session you are at right now is titled Zoning and Housing, Best Practices and Challenges Across New England. And before we turn it over to our presenters, I want to say a super quick thank you to our leading sponsors, Connecticut Department of Housing, the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, Librosa Building Group, Melville Charitable Trust, and Wells Fargo. Their deep support has allowed the conference to happen again this year, and we're so excited with their support to be bringing you these conversations. We also have a big thanks to all of our collaborating sponsors, Bank of America, Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, Key Bank, Rockport Mortgage Corporation, and Webster Bank. Again, without their support, we wouldn't be able to do all the great and bring all these great conversations to you all. We also have a wealth of supporting sponsors, we're always so grateful for you. So you can see everybody who's been a part of this. And last but not least, this session was sponsored by the Community Builders and the JHM group of companies. So thank you very much for sponsoring today's session. A few quick housekeeping items before we get started. The session is being recorded. As I said, all recordings will be made available following the conference as soon as possible. All participants have entered muted. Please remain on mute unless a speaker has asked you to unmute. And if you have any technology issues, please select the chat icon in the Zoom control panel and send it to either myself or Sean, as I mentioned, and we will be able to help assist you as best we can. And your speakers will let you know how they would like content questions to be submitted. And with that, I think I will pass it over to Kylie to get us started. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. I'm Kylie Goslin. I'm the Executive Director of the Partnership for Strong Communities, and I hope that you have had a great time so far. If you've been at some of the different sessions today, learning a lot, and I hope if you were able to join us this morning, enjoyed hearing Deputy Secretary Todman and Diane Yantel and the Commissioner all share some remarks. And as a reminder, as Danielle noted, if you missed anything or there's something coming up that you're going to miss, you can catch them on our YouTube channel or share them with friends. So I'm going to introduce our speakers, or allow our speakers to introduce themselves in a moment. But this session is really to talk about zoning in a regional context. As part of my work with the partnership, I've had the benefit of participating in the New England Housing Network, which is a kind of conglomerate of different partners across New England who work in the affordable housing space. We share all sorts of information, as well as do some targeted work with our congressional delegation, and that work is led out of CHAPA in Massachusetts. So we'll have share some information from them today. But as many of you know, zoning and affordable housing zoning, in particular multifamily housing zoning, has become a major hot topic here in the state of Connecticut. It's always been I'll call it a interesting point of conversation for us here, contentious point of conversation at some moments in time. And certainly during this last election cycle, we've seen conversation ramp up around 830G and affordable housing zoning, particularly as we've seen some market changes. So I won't go into Connecticut's zoning issues in particular in this session. Note that there is a session during the conference on 830G and myths and facts, and I encourage you all to attend that. And there'll also be at a later date some planning and zoning commissioner training around affordable housing and fair housing. But what we wanted to do today was allow you to get the benefit of what I have, which is sharing information regionally, And as you know, New England is unique in that we have a different kind of local control issues than some other areas of the country. And so we may have some similar challenges in the zoning space when it comes to affordable housing. And although we are a small group of states, sometimes we often have these conversations within our own boundaries rather than looking right next door. So that's what we're hoping to do today. So we're going to kick it off with some short presentations from our speakers today from Rhode Island. I'm going to start with Massachusetts, then go to Rhode Island and then Maine. We're going to talk a little bit about what's happening with housing zoning in their state. I'll do some moderated questions with our panel after that. And then I'd love to hear your questions. This is really meant to be an iterative conversation, both between myself and the panelists, but also with those of you participating. So please feel free throughout the presentations or our moderated conversation to put questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, and I'll do my best to monitor those as we move along. So with that, I'm going to, one more thing. I want to thank our friends at CHAPA for helping to organize this, particularly Carol Marine and Eric Shupin, who I think are in the audience today. They were instrumental in helping to gather together some of our partners for this. So with that, I'm going to let each speaker introduce themselves. And so first, I'm going to kick it off to Abhi in Massachusetts.
Thank you so much, Kylie. So excited to be here. Hi, this is Abhi Korve. I'm the Policy Associate at Citizens Housing and Planning Association, CHAPA. I've been here for 5 years and do the policy advocacy work to advocate with the legislature, but also building a coalition to drive forward our affordable housing policies in Massachusetts through CHAPA. So do we let everybody go on the introduction round?
Nope, you can go right ahead and then we'll jump in and let Bryce introduce himself prior to his presentation. So go right ahead.
Perfect, thank you. Just quickly, CHAPA is a nonprofit advocacy organization focused on affordable housing in Massachusetts. And we are sort of the umbrella organization that convenes multiple stakeholders to push for increased resources and also housing policies that ensure that everyone in MA has a safe and affordable home. For a zoning picture in Massachusetts, the Zoning Act has been in place since 1920s that established like standard zoning bylaws and ordinances for each of the 351 municipalities in Massachusetts, except Boston. So there was that in place already. So the zoning in Massachusetts is highly local. Each city and town has their own say. But also as development boomed in 1980s, many restrictive zoning policies were put in place as a backlash. And what we see now, the zoning policies in place is sort of emanated from that. But in 1970s, Chapter 40B was sort of installed that enabled local zoning board of appeals to approve housing developments that do not comply with local zoning under certain specific circumstances. So that was one of the crucial laws that was put in place to allow for more housing development, especially affordable housing, which could bypass the strict zoning laws, especially for communities that did not have enough affordable housing in place. It mandated that 10% of the year-round housing stock in each municipality be restricted as affordable to low and moderate income households, which is under 80% EMI. And in communities short of the 10% threshold, developers could bypass the local zoning and seek a comprehensive permit from the local zoning board of appeals for projects in which 20 to 25% of the units were under long-term affordability restrictions. And that has been one of the main drivers of affordable housing development in Massachusetts. It is one of the most successful affordable housing production tools, and over 70,000 homes have been created across the state using 40B, but it has also been very controversial, and till date we make sure to restrict any or resist any changes that are put in place or they're trying to put in place to repeal 40B. I'm getting a lot of chats there. My sound is not being heard.
Yeah, I was going to say your sound is kind of going in and out. I can hear you okay, but maybe perhaps if you can either move closer to your mic, that might help a little bit.
Is this better?
Yeah, I can hear you okay now.
Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, so as I was saying, 40B is one of the main drivers of affordable housing development. There are also other laws that have been in place in the more recent times. Just to add, like, give a bigger picture, there have also been two other laws that made funding available for higher density developments near transit locations, accompanied by reimbursement for school costs that were not covered by the 40R project. So basically, any opposition that came around how that would impact school costs, that was there were other laws and there were other programs that would provide more funding for communities that would adapt more higher density housing around transit. So it's not just one particular law, but it's a network of many laws that enable more housing production. Are people able to still hear me okay? I'm still getting messages.
I can hear you okay.
This sounds just a bit muffled and going
Yeah.
in and out. I did just suggest to folks in chat, I know that you can't really control that, Abby, to enable closed captioning. Closed captioning is enabled, so folks can select that, and hopefully that can help when we miss a word or two, but we're doing the best we can. Technology, right?
Sorry about that. I'll try to be a little bit more slow, so if that is a problem, it will be addressed. So that was one that was already in place. In the most recent times, as late as 2021, the state legislature also passed the housing choice law that basically reduced the voting threshold from 2/3 to a simple majority for certain smart growth zoning and affordable housing policies, which was a great win because that basically allowed many zoning policies to pass in cities and towns that otherwise were just missing by a few smaller votes, driven by more NIMBY attitudes. And so we were glad to see that for more upzoning measures, certain upzoning measures, it was now easier for cities and towns to pass those things without having only a few group of people slowing it down. The law also created the requirement of MBTA communities that would require at least one zoning district of reasonable size in which multifamily housing was permitted as of right, which also met some other criteria. So this was basically to make sure that we have transit-oriented development in place and zoning in place that would allow that. There are 175 communities out of 351 in Massachusetts that have that are either adjacent or have an MBTA access, and so those communities would now require to zone for multifamily as of right in at least one district, and so that is a huge thing that was after the 1970s. This was one of the main zoning laws that has passed in Massachusetts, and it was not easy. We have built a huge coalition to push for this law and also heavily advocated with the legislature to make sure this goes ahead. The guidelines for those have just come out, and so our next step is going to be working to make sure that law is successfully implemented and that many cities and towns are making use of that law to actually create zoning to have those districts and create more affordable housing and housing in general. But we are also looking at policies like ADU and inclusionary zoning in many communities to make sure that we are putting all tools in place to have this and to increase housing. So it's zoning policies, but also funding that goes along with that, which gives more communities the incentive to go ahead and do that beyond just Boston and Greater Boston, because we do see that most of the multifamily housing that has gone on in Massachusetts has been concentrated in few communities around Boston. And so we want to make sure that everybody who, not just those communities, but even the communities surrounding those, especially with MBTA access, are building more to reduce the pressure on just a few communities that do build high density housing. And so with that, I'm going to take a pause and my presentation there, but happy to take more questions and get into this discussion.
Thanks so much, Avi. That was great. And again, a reminder to folks, if you have questions, put them in the chat box down below. And we will get to them when we're finished with our 3-state presentation. So next, I'm going to turn it over to Bryce Kelly in Rhode Island. Bryce, feel free to introduce yourselves and take it away.
Let me just set everything up. Is everyone able to see my screen? All right. Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for having us and giving us the opportunity to be here and share with colleagues across New England. My name is Bryce Kelly. I'm a research analyst at Housing Works Rhode Island. We're a community partner of Roger Williams University, and we're in their satellite campus in downtown Providence. Both Brenda Clement, our director, and Annette Bourne, our research policy director, send their best. They weren't able to make it today, but they're excited that there's all this, excitement behind this regional sharing approach. I'm going to skip over the outline just to save some time. So a little bit about Housing Works Rhode Island. We conduct research and analyze data related to housing affordability, really working to connect the dots between housing affordability and economic development and those outcomes in health and education. We also publish an annual housing fact book every year. We actually just published the 2022 housing fact book last month. So if anyone's interested, I included the link down below. But we also publish issue briefs and special reports. And as you can see by the clip of the housing fact book, we've definitely taken a zoning approach, a little bit of zoning theme this year, which we intend to continue in ensuing fact books. So a little bit about state strategies and guidelines, but before I get to those documents, I just want to touch on a few aspects of Rhode Island that we really see as favorable to zoning reform. Of course, a lot of the things that Abby mentioned in Massachusetts, those challenges to zoning and zoning for higher density housing types exist in Rhode Island. A lot of the local control, it can make it difficult. But we see just our size in general as being favorable to zoning reform. We're literally only 1,200 square miles. It's about less than 1 million square acres. So, it's a little bit more manageable. We do have a division of statewide planning and planning council, and we have one statewide transit system, that being RIPTA. From a strategic point of view, zoning reform would leverage our location. So again, that regional approach, our location between not only our neighbors in Connecticut and Massachusetts, but also those metro hubs of New York City and Boston. But we do have statewide strategic plans currently. If you look on your left of the screen, that's a snippet from the Land Use 2025 plan, which is being updated for Land Use 2050. That's now in the works. And that's founded on smart growth, including an urban services boundary, which kind of shows you where the public infrastructure is located. It's delineated by that red section, that pinkish section, that's the urban services boundary, mostly on the eastern side of Rhode Island. There's little pockets here and there, and that's where a lot of development is really directed. You'll see those little stars, those refer to growth centers. So those are, areas that are, might have been historically developed in certain ways that might make them more friendly to having higher density housing types as well. And then on the right, it's a snippet from our statewide strategic housing plan, which I'll just say is pretty outdated. I think it was published in the early 2000s, but what we really love to utilize from it is this density matrix, which shows a bunch of different housing typologies that are present in Rhode Island. I think the pictures are even from different communities in Rhode Island, as well as common densities in units per acre that those typologies kind of epitomize. So we find that really helpful, and we utilize that just as much as we possibly can. Moving on, we do have the comprehensive permitting system, comprehensive permitting process, which of course is modeled after 40B, but of the legislation that was proposed and passed this year as it relates to zoning, you can see there's quite a bit that was proposed, not as much that was passed. A number of the bills proposed related to being able to build those smaller type homes, the tiny homes or accessory dwelling units, and actually in some circumstances have provisions to count them among a municipality's long-term affordable housing stock, because of course, we expect in Rhode Island each municipality to have 10% of their housing stock be long-term affordable. Another group of proposals related to the equity of zoning overall, that included the prohibition of single-family zoning in municipalities with populations over 20,000, and that encapsulated about 18 of our 39 municipalities. That was kind of fraught with a lot of messaging issues. Of course, immediately when it was proposed, there were articles about banning single family zones and all that. So that met a lot of resistance at the local level. There was also a bill that dealt with environmental justice. There was a short-term preemption bill that didn't pass, but in 2021, legislators did pass a bill that required short-term rentals to be registered with the state, which we saw as a win. There was also amendment to the zoning enabling to preserve neighborhood character and promote smart growth, which didn't pass. And then another bill allowing home-based businesses. There was one bill specific to our inclusionary zoning fee in lieu formula, which was promising. That would obviously increase that fee in lieu that would be required for a developer if they chose not to include affordable housing. So that, you know, though it didn't pass, that's promising. But, you know, we did see that ADU bill pass, basically, you know, forcing municipalities or, you know, making municipalities allow accessory dwelling units by right in those zones that are zoned for single family by right. But, you know, there's a lot of different interpretations with this bill. A lot of municipalities are reading it in different ways. So we expect it's going to be revisited in 2023. But again, the groundswell is there in Rhode Island to pass something like this. We have obviously a growing aging population that, you know, specifically in those more rural communities that don't have the options of affordable, you know, aging communities. So it's really promising. And then there's another bill that has to do with education requirements for planning and zoning boards and historic zoning boards and commissions, which you know, is still in the process. And so a lot of Housing Works kind of outlook on this is, you know, while a lot of these bills were really promising and exciting, we thought that, you know, a lot of them kind of missed the data. There just isn't data in Rhode Island to really back up and provide the punch to get some of these bills across the finish line. So we see a lot of inspiration in that Desegregate Connecticut Zoning Atlas. TODEX is our Massachusetts Housing Partnerships TODEX tool and their Residensity tool. And we've become the Rhode Island partner to the National Zoning Atlas because we really seek to leverage this kind of data to really enrich, you know, some of these bills and hopefully, you know, just provide more of that push, you know, that I said that would get hopefully them across the finish line. And then, of course, you know, within this larger conversation about regionalism, you know, of course, I mentioned the larger scheme of regionalism that is between Connecticut, or just regionalism as it pertains to New England. But there's also that really, you know, narrow focus regionalism in Rhode Island where, you know, it's so small, but one town is dramatically different from the other. You know, the zoning along a corridor that existed before zoning is dramatically different and has affected development patterns and stuff like that. So we're really trying to knit together a lot of these communities without borders, I guess you could say, that share so much, but don't necessarily share a municipality, to start having conversations between planners, planning boards, residents, you know, that are advocating for affordable housing. You know, we do resident training through health equity zones. That's really exciting. We're starting to really knit together a lot of these resident advocates that can go to planning board meetings and speak to their life experiences and provide a non aging homeowner's perspective at these board meetings. So it's really important, and we definitely see this regional view as being kind of that evolution, that natural evolution to zoning reform and land use reform. And with that, any questions, you can contact us. Small but mighty team, and I really appreciate the time.
Thanks, Bryce. That was really helpful and informative. I'm going to turn it over to Cullen next so we can hear what's going on with him, and then we'll do some moderated questions following that. Again, feel free to put additional questions you may have in the chat. Go ahead, Cullen.
Thanks, Kylie. My name is Cullen Ryan, I'm the Executive Director of Community Housing in Maine. Thank you for convening everybody today and for having this discussion. I'll share my screen and talk about Maine a little bit here. Can you see that okay? Good, great. Maine, big state, but basically the rest of New England fits inside of it. We have a county larger than Rhode Island itself. Only 1.3 million people, but not much housing, and the housing that's there has been there for a long time, and doesn't meet the needs of the population. So we've got huge issues. Let's see, my organization does housing for homeless and special needs population and advocacy. I'm part of the Maine Affordable Housing Coalition as part of the New England Housing Network. For my whole time here, I've been here almost 19 years. In terms of Maine, when you think of New England, people have this picture of these villages and nice looking communities with things kind of close together, surrounded by mountains or areas around it. There's a lot of that in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, and elsewhere. And yet that's been illegal to create for at least 40, 50 years or more. When zoning started to come out saying you need a certain amount of land around you. Some of this had to do with the way that things were laid out, but we've been plagued by that since. Smart Growth has obviously worked to try to reverse that trend, but we need greater density, and making that happen is easier said than done. So obvious issues there. We were fortunate to have a bill get through the legislature this year, LD 2003. It was basically to create recommendations of a commission to increase housing opportunities through setting zoning and land use restrictions. And they had a great group of people that met and worked out a series of strategies, put this into a bill last year. The Speaker of the House put it through. And then Maine has 437 towns in it. It's municipal led. We don't have strong county governments, I think, like much of New England. And that means that all the municipalities had their say, and they said, good idea, but don't be telling us what to do, thank you. And so they were ready to fight this tooth and nail and make sure that nothing would happen locally, that it wasn't within their control, and really worried that people would suddenly move to all these small towns. And that's not what this bill was for. It really was to create density within areas that had greater populations and make it easier for housing there. At any rate, so what happened was the bill got whittled away. People were nipping at it over here and pulling this out and yanking this out. So it got boiled down to something that was a lot less than what it started, but still, there were some good things that came out. We had statewide housing production goals, density requirements, and zoning and land use changes. The big areas were that there was a production goal for the whole state in terms of increasing availability and affordability of all types of housing. We also had regional housing production goals based on that production goal, and then measurable standards and benchmarks to see that success in each of those goals. Municipalities were asked to make sure that things adhere to fair housing and non-discrimination. So we made sure that they would adhere to the affirmatively furthering purposes of the Fair Housing Act and the Maine Human Rights Act as they created housing. And then also municipalities could establish and enforce regulations regarding short-term rental units. This sort of got tossed out, and another group was looking at this year. That was the best way to get it passed. The Airbnbs and other rentals are a hot button issue up here, as I'm sure they are everywhere across New England. So that another group is really seeing what they can do about that. But they wanted local control on that. Municipalities in the end were to allow affordable housing development wherever multifamily dwellings are allowed and have dwelling density of up to 2.5 times the base density that's otherwise allowed in that location. So it basically said, if you have a multifamily housing, you can create, wherever you have that, you can have up to 4 units. Wherever you have single family housing, you can have up to 2 units and accessory dwelling units. But the municipalities can enforce these developments and make sure that it remained affordable for at least 30 years after construction. And affordable meant 80% area median income, not homeless populations per se, but certainly a step in the direction. We were allowed up to 4 dwelling units in residential areas, but municipalities could allow 1 existing dwelling unit with the addition of up to 2 dwelling units in any of those areas. And municipality could allow more units than the number required to be allowed by statute. You can do more, and up to 4 dwelling units per lot if that didn't contain an existing dwelling unit and is in a designated growth area. So basically, designated growth area could get up to 4 units. Anywhere could get an accessory dwelling unit and a 2 unit. So the accessory dwelling units, they could be located anywhere there's a single family dwelling. That's a huge increase in things. They can be constructed an existing dwelling unit on the lot, attached to, sharing a wall, in the garage, kind of anywhere around there. Municipal ordinances allow at least 1 ADU on any lot where a single family unit is the principal structure. So we think that's going to be enormous, particularly in Portland and other municipalities where when you look at the map of Portland, which is our largest city, sounds small to other parts of New England, we have 66,000 people here, but there really is a tiny fraction of the whole city that allows multifamily housing. The rest is single family zoning. So this really opens the door to a lot of other apartments out there and taking pressure off this. So this group has now analyzing short-term rentals, and there may be legislation that's going to come out of that. And that is it. So I have to figure out how to get out of here. There we go. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Colin. That was really, really helpful and informative. I know there's many of you in Connecticut looking at that list of legislative actions that may pass, wondering how we can get some of that here. Ironically, the question that I was going to start with first was about the political climate in each of your cities and zoning, but you all touched on that a little bit. So I want to go a little bit beyond that, although feel free to comment on the sort of political climate broadly as it relates to zoning. It's very challenging here, as I noted in my opening statement. I'm curious to hear where you've had successes and what successes you've had in reaching local leaders, both elected and appointed, that might object to zoning reform efforts like those that Colin just detailed for various reasons: the lack of infrastructure, the community character concerns. What successes have you had in reaching and local leaders and changing minds on those issues? Feel free, any of you, to jump in on these, any three of you.
I can talk a little bit because our organization directly works like to address this particular issue, because we realized a lot of it was emanating from local leaders and policies and town meetings where all this would come out, and huge opposition to projects that were really good. What we did was started a municipal engagement initiative, which basically going into communities and just talking to people, first of all, who are interested in housing, who are a little bit pro-housing, and giving them support to speak up in town meetings and a lot of these places in support of housing. And it's not about somebody coming in and telling the community what to do, but to just finding the voices in those communities who are pro-housing, supporting them, giving them the narratives to help push for these things, to push for these laws and speak in support of these, and just helping them to build a coalition on the local level to push for these things, because leaders will listen to their constituencies, and if they have constituencies speaking strongly in support of housing and affordable housing, that will be listened to. And we have seen a lot of successes, and with help of some state laws that allowed simply bringing down the supermajority to simple majority, allowed many things to pass through, which otherwise were not able to.
Anyone chime in on that?
I would just
Bryce, go ahead.
piggyback and say, I would just, reiterate the work that we're doing, funded by United Way of Rhode Island. Just it's health equity zone trainings, but it's centered around housing, where we just convene a lot of residents, mostly renters, throughout Rhode Island. We just finished up a months-long module training series with Pawtucket and Central Falls, really, giving them the knowledge that they need to be their biggest advocate. And that has, been really exciting to watch. And as we do this more, because we're kind of doing a tour of different municipalities throughout Rhode Island, we're really hoping to, connect each municipality that we've done this with together. So it's a self-sustaining group across the state in the future. But I'd say, past that, we've really begun to focus on examining the needs of each municipality in Rhode Island. It's not enough to say this percentage of your population is cost burdened. We have to drill down into saying, you have a real problem with aging residents that can't afford to age in their home anymore, but there's nothing, there's no alternatives, affordable alternatives. So, why don't you look at ADUs as that possible alternative? But really drilling down, you need 2 bedrooms, you need more affordable 2 bedrooms, you need more affordable 1 bedrooms and stuff like that. And that's been more successful. And then I think the community character is a huge hang up for me, because I love to just, pull out the most beautiful buildings in a village and figure out when they were built. And of course they predate zoning. So using community character to justify zoning regulations, to me has been a big, project. And I think we're going to continue down that route of really just connecting the dots between our favorite places in Rhode Island are all legally non-conforming to today's zoning standards, and to use community character as a justification for zoning standards. It sometimes just doesn't connect. So those are a couple strategies we've used to varying degrees of success.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'd throw out,
Jump in.
Actually, I think Maine, we've come from just the opposite direction. Bryce was just talking about, in that we've just really built a groundswell that there is an affordable housing crisis, and educating the legislature in aggregate about the effects of this, from the workforce to individual populations like long-term stayers to homelessness, and the great expense they cause ricocheting through our most expensive emergency systems. For example, we've determined that the longest stayers in homelessness are up to 29 times more likely to be in the hospital, and up to 44 times more likely to be in jail when unhoused than housed. In fact, the population, once they're housed, essentially doesn't touch those systems at all. So that's helpful. There was a affordable housing caucus of the legislature that came about in the last session. That's going to keep going this year. That drove a lot of the groundswell that pulled different people from both parties together to talk about this on a regular basis, such that when the bills came out, there were lots of sponsors, and there were co-sponsors, and many people who are very interested. It still was a battle to try to get this through all of the folks that wanted to kind of fight it off, but we managed to get at least something through that's pretty significant. But I think building that agreement that there was such a shortage in supply of affordable housing has helped us to get the legislature to start putting things forth that allowed us to get down to, what do we need to do? What do we need to do with zoning? What do we need to do with other areas? So they've taken the reins to say we've got to fix some of these things. But I think we've come at it from the idea of en masse agreement that we have a huge issue to solve.
Yeah, thank you. I'm gonna jump into the questions a little bit and try to group some that folks have asked that are similar. A couple of questions on the targeting or setting targets. Some of you touched on this in your remarks. So in Connecticut, we don't have a set number of units that any town must, any affordable units that any municipality must hit. Our 830G, which is similar to 40B, is in effect for those towns that are below 10%, but there's no mandate for towns to hit that 10%. Those of you that have talked about goals or have specific targets that are required, can you talk a little bit more about those targets and how they're measured and what's included? I think, Cullen, maybe if you want to kick it off, since you recently had a law passed that had some targeting in it, and then I'd love to hear from Bryce and Avi on that.
Sure. So yeah, there is targeting in the law. And again, it was very difficult to get everybody to agree to get this thing through. It was a bit of a bear. And it was changing essentially every single day right through until it finally was voted on, with things being peeled away from it. And one of the ways that they got it through was to say, we're not going to rush this through. So there was a 1-year pause. So in answer, I was just typing an answer to David Fink's question in terms of numbers. We actually are going to see most of this law start to be implemented next summer, or the end of June, when it will have been 12 months from the end of the legislature. So they're still actually working closely to educate municipalities about what they're going to need to do and what they won't need to do. And the state is working closely to help to get this to be in motion. So I think that helped to get it through. There was so much worry. How are you going to throw our towns into a tailspin here, this is going to be a mess. And we said, we're going to take our time and really make sure that everyone is in the know and clear about what the expectations are. So that is coming. And so there hasn't been any penalty. This hasn't started. It is on its way. And so municipalities in the state are gearing up for it right now. And I think that had some wisdom. The idea of sudden change was really too scary, I think, for local municipalities, but the idea of it coming in a year with careful thought, planning, where they were more empowered, felt acceptable as a compromise.
Go ahead, Bryce.
So our comprehensive permitting process is pretty similar, in that there's no way to like punish a community that is under 10%. The only specific targeting I can think of, it would be that single family zoning bill that was proposed targeting communities with populations over 20,000. Other than that, I think you're going to find a lot of communities in Rhode Island that will make the argument that, the 10% goal for them isn't fair because they're a more rural community versus a Providence that's denser. Whether there's merit in that, I don't know, but yeah, there's just not yet that kind of targeting that really, kind of putting the blinders on and saying you need this here and this there.
Yeah, and Abby, maybe if you want to comment on that, and then also if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about how any targeting measurements interact with 40B. I think that's there's some questions around that too.
Yeah, I mean, because we have had it in place for a while now, many communities have also reached the safe harbor status where they have already achieved 10% of their stock in affordable housing through the subsidized housing inventory. But we have seen many developers take advantage of that and of that law and build more. What is also another point of discussion in our state is like what gets counted to that 10%, because many units which are built along with affordable housing, which are actually market rate, do get counted. And so in many cases, that number is actually lower than 10%, but having that has really helped many communities at least get there, which were barely at like 2%, 3%. And so it is not perfect, but we have fiercely defended that because there is no other alternative to that, which has created so much of affordable housing. And so, in fact, there was a ballot initiative to repeal that law. And thanks to my colleague Carol, who led a lot of efforts on that, we have resisted all of those efforts. But as I said, it's not perfect, but we are trying to get more. It's also the market that is working in the favor of that. Many developers are using it, and so we are just glad to see that. And I may have missed some question.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in. I'm trying to get through. So we got some more questions here. We got about 4 more minutes. So, question about folks in the community speaking directly with those that are implementing laws that are affecting them. And I'm curious to hear from some of you on how and whether you're incorporating the voices of folks with lived expertise of housing insecurity in your efforts, particularly your legislative efforts, and also those local conversations, Avi, those that you were mentioning in particular, and how those have been helpful.
Yes, I mean, there are a lot of narratives. What we have tried to do is just focus on the positives. We have tried to sometimes find the unusual or not the usual suspects of, like, there are many times churches and a lot of local organizations that you otherwise would not suspect, but actually are pro-housing voices. And so just getting them together, because those exist in those communities. It's just about getting them together. And so simply having housing, like an evening of housing discussions and over in a local area, getting those together, just inviting those people and having them interact with each other has in many communities sparked coalitions that are sustaining themselves. And just simply going to town meetings and speaking up in support of housing, that has been very helpful, but also there's a lot of support that goes on behind technical assistance, even for planners and a lot of other staff that work in the municipal governments who do help with this work. And so just providing support to all of them has been really game changing. And we have seen that because those same groups then advocate on the state level to push for more zoning changes or zoning laws that are helpful, like the MBTA community requirement.
Yeah, and I know, I think my internet might have cut out there at the end. But thank you for answering that, Abby. I was talking about talking about how to get community folks involved in the conversation, but particularly about including folks with lived expertise in the conversation and how you're doing that and how it's again helping shape decisions. So Colin or Bryce, do either one of you want to jump in on that before I move to a new question?
Yeah, I'll just say that we bring together a lot of different stakeholders with our resident meetings, anybody from, you know, someone on a city council, town planners. We often have the local community development corporations come and speak. So, you know, we have people from all different incomes and ages represent the residents. So that's been really helpful. We've actually had city councilors walk residents through the process on how to make, you know, public remarks on development projects, which has been really, really exciting. And it's been really helpful. And I think, you know, any way we can bring stakeholders together in these meetings and get residents more comfortable with being able to show up and, you know, voice their concerns is a benefit to everybody. So that's been really successful, and we're hoping to continue that in the future. And I mean, I'll say that, you know, all the town planners have been really, really gracious. You know, sometimes you might imagine they would be on the defensive knowing they're coming into a resident driven conversation like that, but they've all been really gracious. They've all been really understanding. So it's opened up a lot of avenues for conversations that I don't think normally would have existed. So that's been really exciting as well.
I'll just say in Maine, we've been doing I think a very good job of including people with lived experience, at least from the homeless arena. We have people with lived experience on the statewide homeless council, in particular, a seat set aside for the population, also on the board of directors for the continuum of care, and on the continuum of care itself, a committee for that. But whenever we have a piece of legislation, we've learned, I think pretty recently, there's been sort of a change. Instead of the legislative committees wanting to hear from 100 people and, you know, 3 minutes at a time, we've kind of been boiling it down to 7 or 8 people. And we always include 1 or 2 people who are directly affected by the, you know, whatever it is we're trying to put through or support. And I can tell you that with people from the committee, there's always questions for that person that's speaking from their own personal experience. It opens the door to a different angle for consumption, I think, for an understanding for the decision makers. And that's done at the legislature and also at city council levels and local levels. So that seems to be a really useful opportunity for a direct dialogue for people who are affected by the policies. The rest of us may be advocates, but we can sort of all be grouped into the usual suspects sometimes. You know, they see a lot of us and hear from us a lot, and, you know, we know how it all works. But when we get somebody who's right in the thick of things, describing how things are affecting them, it really seems to open the door to people understanding it in a new way. So I'm glad you raised that question. I hope that it's done locally and in each of the states.
Yeah, I agree, Colin. I think it's so important and also super effective and important that we support folks with lived expertise in whatever way we can, whether that's compensation, arming them with information, transportation, all those things, and participating in the sort of traditional processes that have been set up to provide that feedback. On that note, too, there's a question in the comments about planning and zoning boards. And obviously you all noted this in your comments of the role that local planning and zoning officials, whatever that looks like in any given town, the important role and the huge role that they play and the power that those local folks hold in determining where housing goes and what it looks like. And so the question in there about changing the makeup of planning and zoning boards over time. They're largely traditionally white and male and have been, although, you know, they're certainly starting to see some younger folks in there and some more individuals of color. But curious to hear from you all on whether that's a focus of your efforts on recruiting folks for planning and zoning boards or providing education and support, particularly for new commissioners throughout your states.
I'll just say I put my money where my mouth was. I'm a renter, I'm 27, and I just joined my town's planning board. But in terms of, you know, activating the residents that we've been training, not activating, but, you know, inspiring the residents that we've been training, there's certainly 2 or 3 that have been increasingly involved in local politics and local decision-making processes, and we're looking actively to joining those boards. So we're making progress in that front, and it's exciting. But yeah, I mean, it is overwhelmingly older homeowners in every single municipality. So it's an uphill battle to convince a younger person that zoning matters to them. It's an even greater battle to convince them to join a planning board or a zoning board of review.
But the meetings are so fun. Avi, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I mean, what we have done is just basically sustain the coalition, and through that coalition, we have seen a lot of people by themselves wanting to, you know, serve in these positions, but also we have seen many a times the same people or the same coalitions where people have stood up for even elected positions on the town level because they were, you know, they realized the breadth of the problem, they have been living in it. And so what we have done is to simply make those environments conducive for more housing, and that has spurred a lot of positive developments in cities. I have to say, though, that there are many more cities that we have, you know, we have to still work on. But it's just these support groups that would, also a lot of information sharing. And what we also do is get a lot of experts to even talk about communication on how do you communicate these narratives in a positive sense without talking about a lot of fear kind of a language and too much crisis language, but more so positive and focusing on values and how do we want to see your community? Like, do you want to have a community and say in how you shape that community, and just those kind of narratives to also drive things forward. So yeah, but I also want to add that on state level, it is important that you look around the room and ask who is not there in the room to make sure we are getting more perspectives in it. That is to answer the previous question, but that is something that we have incorporated in our everyday work.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to pivot us quickly. We have about 7 or 8 minutes left. A couple more specific bill-related laws. I see Will Cromwell asking a question about the differences between 40B and 830G, and we can get into that too. But I see a question from David Fink specifically about Massachusetts 40R, and Avi was wondering if you might go into that a little. So his question specifically is, how has 40R worked in creating new income restricted units, and has the state had to pay out money to municipalities under 40S? Is that, I'm not sure if that's what you meant, to reimburse them for income?
Yeah. So basically, those two things, 40R and 40S, were implemented to as sort of cushioning for like all those narratives around like how is this going to impact our schools with more high density housing, how is this going to impact you know, just the overall impact on schools and the community. And so those two programs provided funding, incentives as well as funding for schools, and also incentives for if you want to build around the transit. I mean, the studies that were done on that almost around 4 years ago showed that not a lot of development happened with those programs. In fact, it's not like those programs have been used too much. In fact, they have been used a little less than what we expected. But to even have those programs in place provides us with that cushion that, no, if you are concerned about these things, these programs are there, they can help. And so there are communities who have taken advantage of those programs. And if that narrative comes up, then we have a concrete solution for those concerns. And so that is where those programs have been helpful.
Thank you. On that note, I wanted to maybe Colin and Bryce, you can jump in on this too, on the common myths about affordable housing that persists. And Avi noted this school costs being one of them, property values being another. There's been some recent studies out there, again, reinforcing those as myths and really putting some numbers behind the fact that, you know, on the valuation component, that in some cases affordable housing actually increases value and doesn't decrease it. What have you found effective in combating common myths? And are there any new myths you're hearing lately? Or is it the old stuff? And have you found any new ways to share information to tamp down on those or help create some more clarity for folks that continue to share that information or misinformation?
Yeah, I'll just say that I've heard concern about the ADU law increasing school enrollment, and it blows my mind, like an accessory dwelling unit. In terms of that, we just show homes. So local, like I was saying in those training modules, we have the local community development corporations come and talk about, you know, all that goes into making these affordable units and how the highest standards that they have to build it to. And more often than not, you know, Rhode Island has some of the oldest housing stock in the nation. So, you know, when we're talking about an affordable housing development going up down the street, it inherently is going to be of better quality than probably 90% of that same neighborhood, because that neighborhood was probably built prior to 1900. But in terms of that, yeah, we love showing the amazing developments that are being done by our CDCs that are going up everywhere. They've been super helpful in providing a lot of that context that kind of tamps down on some of those myths. Because they're in it every single day and they understand. They're at these board meetings. They know more than we do at Housing Works about those myths and how to get around them. So we really rely on them because they've been such a great resource, you know, for providing that nuance and context to get around it.
Colin, anything to add on that?
Yeah, just as Bryce just said, I think Rhode Island and Maine are neck and neck in terms of oldest housing stock. I think Maine's got everybody beat in terms of oldest population and a lot of aging in place, a lot of people who have mobility concerns. And so we're also coming at this from just an accessibility standpoint that these newer buildings, low-income housing tax credit programs are going to have handicap accessibility and adaptability features that are going to help to solve that problem as well. And just pure education, as you said, Kylie, you know, it is, as long as it's under 400 units, it's been proven across the country, whenever you have a low-income housing development, it actually increases neighboring property values. These are well-kept buildings. They are well-managed. They are built to last and built to look great later on and to be great, you know, for 100 years or so. So this is a value add to the community. We still face not in my backyard stuff, as you can imagine. People don't, you know, once they get in, I've got mine. I don't want anybody else in here. I want these people, all that kind of thing. It's the exact same population. They're fearful of keeping out. And I think one of the most promising things that I've seen is a little bit of a movement of a yes in my backyard. We know who shows up at these meetings. It's the naysayers and people who are scared and concerned. We know what solves their needs, but it's slow. It's education, helping people to understand actually what the facts are, but that can be elusive and hard to do in public forums when people are angry. But having a group of people who really want to see change and have, you know, costs go down because, and availability of workforce and solving all the issues that come with a lack of housing around the area, coming in, being willing to show up and talk about, like, yes, this is important to have this and I support this, is really important, and it just hasn't happened before. So I would encourage local efforts to rally a group of people who are willing to come and voice their support for projects, just like people don't show up at planning board meetings. They also only show up if they're scared or opposed to something, you know. So it's good to have people who will show up to say yes.
Yeah, the YIMBYs. Thank you. Thanks, Colin. Well, we're just about at time. I want to give a big thanks to our panelists today for remoting into our meeting virtually so we can have a virtual regional conversation. I hope to have more of these. I think they're really helpful, and there's so many great questions in the chat and many I didn't get to. So I apologize if you're one of those folks, and hopefully we can have some more events like this. I want to note quickly too, Bryce mentioned the amazing work that Housing Works Rhode Island does in producing their housing fact guide, and also the zoning atlas. For those of you who aren't familiar, Desegregate Connecticut has done a great job producing zoning atlas here in Connecticut. And then the Partnership for Strong Communities, our organization, also produces housing data profiles, which are town by town demographic and housing profiles. It's an online interactive database many of you are familiar with if you're at the municipal level. And just wanted to share with you all that has been recently updated, and those updates are live as of this week. So if you go to pschousing.org, that data is available there too. So again, thank you to all our speakers. I hope you all are able to join us for the remaining sessions today and tomorrow and Wednesday. Thanks again, and have a great afternoon, everybody.